not sort of the bleached version that they might get, you know, in their one-day civics course in high school. In any case, my great-grandfather had believed, of course, he was devout, and the first commandment of the Bible, the Torah to God, from God to man, is Peru U'Revu, and he had 18 children. And he couldn't, you know, the wise men who were busy studying in the Beis HaMedrashes those days, they didn't have money. So they sent 3 children to America, the last 3. In the 1890s, this is. And my grandfather was one of them, Jacob. Jacob Schumer. This is an interesting story for all of you because it's the generation before. Jacob Schumer was supposed to be watched by an uncle. Oh, one other point which will relate. The name Schumer, as you know, in Eastern Europe, the Jews took names last. And it was often their profession. And so my ancestors were actually guardians of the ghetto wall in Shortcut. And so their name was Scheumer. And when they came to America, when my grandfather came to America, the immigration officer, obviously a Shagitz, wrote down Schumer. And that's how we became Schumer. But my name is Shomer, Scheumer, and I believe Hashem has given me that name. In any case, so my grandfather became a street urchin. No one was watching him. No one was watching him. And he would run it, sleep in doorways, steal apples. He was like a street urchin. And at age 14, it was pouring rain, and he walked into something called the Labor Temple, which had been set up by the labor unions to win the Jews over to the labor movement in the Lower East Side. And he... Go ahead, did you want to... No. Okay. And he heard Eugene V. Debs and Will and Ariel Durant speak, 2 great lefties of their day. And he became into this. And he became a union organizer, never a socialist. It's just my little family history. Went up to Utica, organized people in the paper mills, poor. They were Jewish, but not religious. My father told me he was always ashamed because he wasn't bar mitzvah. My grandfather would not bar mitzvah. And then the day after World War II, my father enlists and becomes he's very smart. He takes a test. He comes up at the top of the list, so they teach him radar, which was then top secret. He had to get clearance. And he became a navigator and flew freighters over the Himalaya mountains to supply Chiang Kai-shek, who was in inland China. It was the most perilous mission, because not because the Japanese planes, they were occasionally around, but because the clouds enshrouded the mountains, and you couldn't see them, and they'd crash into the mountains. You know, the ceiling of the plane was 30,000, the mountains were 27,000. Radar helped establish that. You know, you could see the mountains. It was not perfect then. You couldn't yet see planes, you could see mountains. He comes back from World War II. He's the oldest boy. My grandfather has bought a little exterminating business in Bedford-Stuyvesant, in Brooklyn, from a German-American who was sure the Nazis were going to bomb New York, and that guy moved to Montana. This is all while our brethren are suffering so. And I asked my parents what they knew. They knew a little, but not much. You know, they were average people. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what. I mean, the more well-established Jews deserve all the disrepute. You know, the Saul Blooms, who was head of the Foreign Relations Committee. But the average person really didn't know much. And the New York Times, which was so afraid of being Jewish, went bent over backwards not to tell the story. And all the other people followed. The news media followed. Anyway, he comes back, and my father, his whole life, just built up that little exterminating business. Not successful. He hated it. He was not a businessman. He should have gone to college. He was smart. But he didn't. And so he had a small little business. My mother, she comes from a whole different side. This is so interesting. She's a Yekka. Her family came in like 1860. My grandfather was a builder here. They lived in Borough Park. We went back on their 60th anniversary on a Sunday. We hired a bus and went to all the places of their life. She lived on 46th Street between 13th and 14th Avenue. My father was poorer. He lived in when they came back, he lived in a 4-story walk-up on 54th Street, and their next-door neighbor across the street was the comedian Buddy Hackett. But in any case, my mother was middle class. Her father was a builder, and they built a little of the row houses. He was the president of the Reform Temple, the Eka Temple, Temple Emmanuel, right here. They met. My mother's parents thought she was marrying beneath her, but she loved him, and you know, Baruch Hashem, they've been married 60 years in a wonderful marriage and have children, grandchildren, etc. And now my father's retired and happy. So that's they wanted me to be a lawyer and make money. I loved politics. And so I ran for office at age 23 in Flatbush. Flatbush was then not a frum neighborhood, a little bit on Avenue J, although already the three great yeshivas had moved. Torah Vadas in the north, Chaim Berlin in the middle, and Miri Yeshiva in the south. But there weren't many frum Jews there. But even then, the neighborhood was beginning to change. And so, because I saw Mr. Schroen, wherever he is, his son, and others, and my job was then to be the shomer of the neighborhood, and I did two things. One, I put in tough crime laws. Crime was ripping apart our neighborhood. I wrote the laws when Congress, I was in Congress already now, that had the federal death penalty, that had 3 strikes and you're out. The most important law I think I have ever written said we will give New York State money for prisons, but the prisoners have to serve 85% of their sentence. Because we had in the early 80s people who would commit crimes and not go to jail. And 80% of the people convicted of a felony had been convicted of a previous felony. So you don't have to be a great genius, you don't have to be a Talmud Chacham to know that if you keep those people in jail for a long period of time, you'll reduce crime. And that's what I did. Giuliani I worked with, he got the cops on the street and they did a good job and he gets the credit. But the thing I'm proudest of is long sentences for felonies, and it made New York come back. So that was part of being shomer of the name.